proposition today is telling us about how we should combat existential nihilism. They're telling us that in the world, there are only two kinds of people. People who are not famous, who are doing nothing, and celebrities who do everything and have a meaningful life. However, opposition, we see that this is false. So let's see their 2 points they brought to us today. The first on being a celebrity versus being an average individual, and the second on how complacency is not meaningful. Let's take a look at their paradigm. They have oversimplified the world into two groups of people, as I have said earlier on. Now let's take a look at the resolution. We're talking about an average individual. Now the average is actually consistent of many different standards. So what they are having instead is a false representation of people as a whole. They're essentially saying that once you're past 27, no one is going to be happy. That our judges in this room, that our coaches in the room are should basically go and die because they can no longer be happy. This is essentially what they're saying, and we say that this is not true. We say that you can reach self-actualization without having to die at 27. No, thank you. Now, they have also said that drugs and all these things are a system of choice, that people have choice, and they can do whatever they want. However, we say two things. The first is that choice is often undermined by social setting. My partner Grace has already showed you about situational morality and how even though someone may think that they are not subjugated to the forces around them, that this is oftentimes a fallacy. We see this with the Stafford Prison experiment when people acted extremely differently from how they normally would. They said that drugs are only a side effect of what happens when you do not reach of being a celebrity. However, we say that this is not true. We say that drugs are oftentimes undermining the very purpose of self-actualization that they bring. They're painting drugs in a system of heroin chic, where you only have happiness, and they have not shown us the negative effects. And they have oversimplified this topic. Now let's take a look at the second point about how complacency is not meaningful. Now we see that our opposition is neglecting the nuances of individuals, because individuals all have different goals, and they're basically simplifying the world into black and white by saying that simply that everyone wants to be famous, that this is the only way that you can reach self-actualization. So we say instead that there are many other ways to do so. Yes.
We said that being famous is something that allows you much more easily to achieve your dreams, because as I said, all these people here are above average, especially in looks.
So they're essentially saying that this is for average people. However, what we say is that the average individual, let's take a look at the average individual. They're oftentimes on social media and other platforms, people are given a false idealization of fame, as my partner Grace has already stated. Now let's take a look at what they said. Let's break down the argument. They basically said that social inequity can be solved by fame, because if you're poor, then you can become rich by becoming famous. Now we say that this does not actually change the root of society, that this does not actually change any social inequity, but rather propagates a system where people can only think that they have actual worth if they are rich, if they are a consumer. They're essentially advocating for a world where we are all happiness machines. Now we say that they are propagating a world where you can only be satisfied through greed, and we say that their world is actually one that has been formulated and constructed strongly by corporations who want to seek people becoming consumers. Now let's take a look at my own point of today. I will be bringing the point about how Club 21 should not become a dogma, and it is actually against the values that people should have. Now let's take a look at the values that Club 27 generally includes. Now it shows an easy way to fame. It shows that fame is above everything. It is better than life. It is better than anything you can possibly have, better than old age. Now we say that they are actually saying that they are not showing the truth. Many times people think that becoming older is not a part of happiness. However, we say that is false. We say that this is an oversimplified version of the world, and that their world is actually one that just propagates the notion that corporations should have more power, because consumerism is important. Now let's take a look and why this is actually not the harm principle. They brought up this example of self-choice and how people, as long as they don't harm other people, that this is okay. Now let's bring up three harms of today, which goes directly under the values that Club 20 represents. We have three. So our first is that it is not that an easy way to fame. It actually reflects poorly in society. The second on this is how it discredits workers, and the third on the role model syndrome. Let's take a look at the first harm that they have failed to talk about. The first harm is how it actually validates detrimental consequences. It says that because you're famous, because you have all these things, then you can actually justify all these adverse effects that you're implementing upon society and yourself. We're saying that this is actually not going to help self-actualization. They're simply saying that fame equals self-actualization, and they're completely ignoring all the other parts of being a member of Club 27. Now we also say that the nature of fame shifts away from being something that people should seek after into being something that someone can suddenly gain through making a sacrifice. Now let's take a look at why this discredits workers, which is our second harm. And we see that side opening, on the opening government, that they have actually not brought us any real harms that are actually tangible. Now let's see that if we discredit workers who work really hard, what does this reflect to? This reflects that the people who actually have worked hard, Emma Watson, Taylor Swift, and other people, they are actually discredited. That other people see that they are the only people that they are part of a club that generally does terrible things in order to get what they want. Now let's take a look at the last and probably the most important effect about role models. Now we see that there is actually a trickle-down effect about how people view the people who they admire. No, thank you. Now we see that side open government has failed to recognize that this topic is about the average individual. Now we say that because someone is an average individual, that this suddenly increases the empathy that other average individuals see. They see that this was a normal person, but because they chose to make the sacrifice, that they're suddenly living this idealized version of fame that my partner Grace has already brought up. We say that because of this empathy, they're more likely to empathize with these people and do things that are worse for themselves, and this lowers the morality of society as a whole. Because what happens? Because we say that this actually just leads to a society of shallow contented. In Fahrenheit 451, this is exactly what happened. Because people wanted to simply become happiness machines, then this led to a detrimental society without any real moral values, which simply wanted to exist along the idea upon shallow ideals. So what have we done for you today? We see that in today's debate that we have proven that side opening government has completely simplified the resolution. They have completely simplified people as a general species. And we see that our side has given us three main contentions about the false idealization of fame, about how Club 21 does not stand for the right values, and how that this is actually ultimately detrimental to our society, and we have given you actual harms. Right side opening government has given you rather wishy-washy ideals without any actual harms. Thank you.
I send the deal for the remarks to start the lower half of the grand final. Let's give the course to them up.
As an individual, I would choose to be part of Club 27. But instead of the opening, where they basically assume that this individual was somehow shackled by a life of conformity and uniformity, we will take a more moderate view. We will assume that I, as an individual, actually is an average individual, not someone who is constrained by economic immobility. So, what is our stance in our team? First of all, we believe that becoming part of Club 27 actually allows me to produce some of the best works as an artist. And secondly, we believe that I'll be able to assume a special role that can provide inspiration for children in the future. But before I move on to my own arguments, I would like to provide a brief rebuttal from what we heard from Abigail and Grace. Now, they've essentially brought to us three arguments. First, they talked about how this idealizes drug and violence. Second, they talked about how this validates detrimental consequences. And thirdly, they talked about how this increases false empathy. Now, firstly, on how it idealizes drug and violence. What we first need to hear from them is why exactly drug and alcohol and violence is bad. We haven't even heard this. That was our main impact. Their assumption was that drug and alcohol is somehow bad. We first had to hear why drug and alcohol, violence, in and of its, those things are inherently bad. We need to hear this in our next speaker, but they don't have a next speaker. We think that the public will not necessarily interpret the members of Club 27 in a negative light. What they said was that these people will automatically associate these and somehow justify these bad acts simply because these individuals are famous. We think that what these people will more focus on is the fact that these people manage to succeed and live for 27 years despite all these adversity, rather than the adversity itself. Second, I want to talk about how this does not actually increase false empathy. Now, we think that in the society we live in, there are plenty of counter-narratives that stigmatize the people that they're talking about. There are plenty of counter-narratives in the media that stigmatize drug addicts, that stigmatize alcoholics, and stigmatize people who are subject to violence and domestic violence. We think that because of all these counter-narratives that exist, the harm that they're talking about, the impact of the harm that they're talking about is instantly mitigated. But secondly, we think that most people in general will think of Club 27 as a special case, not like a general case where alcohol and drug is always good, but a special case where these individuals succeeded despite all these adversities of suffering alcoholism and drug abuse. Now, having dealt with our case and having broken down all their arguments, I want to move on to two of my own unique extensions. Firstly, I want to talk about how this enables people to produce some of the best works. Now, if we look into the history of artists, we see that some of the best works produced by artists, people like Picasso, people like the person who drew Mona Lisa, some people sorry, I'm like, yeah, were oftentimes done by people who are either mentally ill or under the influence of alcohol. We see that because some of the best works were able to be produced under such influences, I am willing to take on the role, to assume a special role, to provide one of the best works in the art industry by joining Club 27. I think that the comparative here is the ability to produce one of the best artworks in history versus the status quo, where I live as an average individual, just going to 9-to-5 jobs in a tiny cubicle. I think the comparative here clearly falls under our side, where I have the ability to assume a special role of leadership and provide a lot of inspiration for future generations of artists and people. So this actually is a perfect gateway for my second argument about how joining Club 27 enables me to provide a lot of inspiration for people. Now, Matt here talked about the counter-narrative that they are able to provide. He talked about how the counter-narrative they are able to provide is one that says that that a good life is not necessarily a long life. We have an even better counter-narrative on our side, which actually was actually conceded by Abigail herself. She said that celebrities are no longer seen as like perfect people. We think that this is the exact counter-narrative that we want to provide on our side. Because we see that in the status quo, a lot of people associate celebrities to like Barbie dolls, to one of the most perfect people in the world. And that is why there's such high suicide rates among young teenage girls in places like UK and places like US. Because these girls want to try to be like these celebrities. That we will dissolve this detrimental, this damaging mindset on our side. Because we'll start to associate celebrities as people who are more like us, people who are able to suffer consequences like an average individual. We see that because of this establishment of a counter-narrative that is against the culture that we're used to, we're able to tell people that there are different possible paths in lives. That is, you don't have to be perfect to be a celebrity. You don't have to look like you don't have to possess a certain body image to become a celebrity or become successful. We think that is one of the main impacts that our side is able to bring for you. But broadly speaking, we think that an extension of this is that in general, people will see that there are many ways to live your life. Because right now, we must recognize the fact that people all have different abilities. Some of us are good at the sciences, some of us are good at debates, some of us are good at arts. We think that an extension of the fact that there's no perfect type of person actually shows the public that you can live your life whatever way you want, depending on the strengths that you possess. We think that because of this, people will no longer feel that they have to stick to one specific type of a life to live, and will decrease suicide rates and decrease depression around the world. But, George?
Sure. We argue that the true inspiration is not Michael Jackson who took drugs and killed himself. The true inspiration is Theresa Teng, Jeff Wang, who continually live and continue a true inspiration to people.
What?
The true inspiration is not Michael Jackson who killed himself, but the legends of Theresa Teng, Jeff Wang, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Michelle Pfeiffer, who continue to be a legacy even up to 60 or 70 years old. That's the true inspiration to kids.
Oh, we think that the problem with that is that people often associate these celebrities to a perfect life. That is, they often associate these people as being able to rise to fame despite, without going through all the adverse effects that I myself would have to face if I were in Club 27. We think that is precisely the reason that we have to provide a counter-narrative to people, that these celebrities, despite their rise to fame, had to suffer the adverse consequences and had to die at the age of 27. We think that the counter-narrative that we are able to provide on our side is much more powerful than the one that exists in the status quo. And for all the reasons that, one, now I'll be able to produce some of the best works in history, and second, because I have the ability to provide a unique inspiration for future generations, I would take on the challenge to become a member of Club 27.
And then the member of government for the remarks, now I call upon member of opposition. Here.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, although the opening opposition has already touched on some of the opening governance cases, I'd like to go further in dismantling both the opening and closing governance cases. Now, first of all, one of the key contentions of opening government is this entire idea that your dream in life is to become a rock star with a mansion and a Victoria's Secret wife. However, this is not the dream of most people. This is the dream of your average hormonal teenage male, aka the first 3 speakers of the government team. Even if you accept that this is the dream of every single person, I answer this with one word: disillusionment. And in order to explain this, I will talk about my favorite piece of literature, Kurt Cobain's Suicide Notes. Now, one of his lines is that the excitement I first felt at writing, at singing, I haven't felt that for years. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is your textbook definition of disillusionment. And why has he gone through this? It's because of Club 27. You know why? Because the letter was addressed to Boda, an imaginary friend he had when he was 5 years old. He wants to return to this time of innocence before he was corrupted by this life of fame, then this high roller life, aka the life of Club 27. Ladies and gentlemen, the life of Club 27 actually leads to withdrawal. Now, opening Guff has gone so far as to say that after 25, you start to lose your touch with life. You start to become withdrawal. However, what truly makes you withdraw from life is this disillusionment, where they no longer feel the same excitement that they once felt because of the superficial world that they live in. In addition to that, the closing gov has talked about how they produce about how people in Club 27 produce better work. However, that is not true. Just look at what Kurt Cobain said. He hadn't felt the same excitement for years. In his eyes, I don't believe that what he created in the later years of his life, there is no way that he would consider this as his best work. In addition to that, they have said that the average life is the life of an average person is bleak and grim. If this is what they truly believe, this solution is not Club 27, it is Prozac and Zoloft, antidepressants, ladies and gentlemen. Now, they've also said that after 25, your life is over. That is the peak of your life, and after that, you're just slowly dying. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in order to respond to this, let me just paint you a picture. Now, the average person, when he dies, or he or she dies, he'll probably be in bed, surrounded by those that he loves, in a house that he bought with his own hard work. He'd probably be content and happy based on what he did in his life. However, let me just tell you about how Kurt Cobain died. His last words in Suicide Note is, "I'm sorry, Linda, his wife, I love you so much, but I just can't do this anymore." Ladies and gentlemen, this is a man who hated his life so much that it actually outweighed the love of his love for his wife and his kids, and that's why he chose to end his life. In addition to that, the closing government has asked an easy question: how are drugs and alcohol bad? No, first of all, there are health issues and addictive issues. However, I'm not your mom. I don't care about that. Let me just talk about how it dulls your senses. And it's impossible to live a long and meaningful life if your senses are dulled by alcohol and drugs, ladies and gentlemen. Now, moving on to my own extensions. Now, a lot of this debate has been over whether a short life is good or bad. Although my opening opposition has touched on some of this, I would like to take this a lot further. First of all, let's talk about how Club 27 loses its attractiveness when it is no longer exclusive. The only reason it is attractive to the average person is because it is exclusive. The only reason we see a rock star has a beautiful wife and a mansion and does drugs and eventually dies, someone in Club 27, the only reason we see him when we want to be him is we can't be him. That's why we want to be him. However, every single person is allowed to be that person at merely, like, let's say the press of a button, then it loses its attractiveness. In addition to that, my opponents have made an assumption that every single person would enjoy this life. Now, let me just analyze some of the people in Club 27. Let's just say Kurt Cobain for example. He is much more than an individual. He's a cultural icon. He represents teenage angst and teenage rebellion. Now, while some teenagers might identify with that, the average person and most people don't identify, no thank you, don't identify with that cultural icon. In addition to that, they have said, as I have previously stated, all this superficial world that these rock stars live in, and that these people in Club 27, the superficial world that they live in actually makes them disillusioned. They no longer feel the same genuine, innate feelings about what they're doing and about their life than they did before they entered this world. And as evidence, once again, look at Kurt Cobain's suicide letter. The reason why he chose to end his life is he felt so disconnected from his original purpose, which is to create music. Music that had feeling, music that expressed